Yo, word is up, everybody. We're going to take a look at Daybreak's archetypal support, or rather, what decks does the Daybreak set support, whether those be new decks in Solar, or past decks, or even new archetypes that we might want to say show up now with some of the support that Daybreak brings. So let's jump into that. Alright, I hope you have your starter stocks ready. We're starting with artifacts. Now, artifacts in the past, they're expensive. If your Empowered Elestral gets destroyed, you're losing 2 cards and 3 resources all at once. Generally, artifacts aren't played, even with these powerful searchers like a Festus Rider, as I said. Now, what comes and changes in Daybreak to allow artifacts to kind of flourish a bit more, in my opinion? That's going to be Guardian of the Fleece. This card is crazy. The ability to both negate and pop a card, and it specifically isn't destroying the cards negating, it's destroying any card your opponent has on board, is extremely powerful and helps kind of bridge the gap between your Empowered Elestrals costing you potentially so much resources and cards on board, to mitigate that with just the probably best counter rune situationally in the game. Guardian of the Fleece is crazy. The fact that it just exists is extremely powerful. In addition, we also have counter runes like Argo, which turns all of your artifacts, so you can kind of turn your deck into artifact toolbox, into combat tricks where your opponent goes, cool, I'm attacking your Elestral, I play Argo, I bring out my Scythe of Demeter, or even like a Necklace of Harmonia, and just turn it into a battle trick there to force my opponent to now lose their Elestral, is really powerful. In addition, some of the other side support we have is like Heliolith, allowing you, if you have cards on board, you have an Elestral already empowered on board, your next turn you drop Heliolith down, you can bounce something, you get a 5/5 on board, you can start putting some damage in. Additionally, we have Cyphermel, which comes with its artifact already attached to it, which you can also cast that artifact for free, helping you mitigate, or I shouldn't say free, it's from your underworld with spirits, but that helps you mitigate, again, the cost that artifacts require. Again, artifacts are really expensive, so if you can say like, Nog into Cyphermel turn 1, get Guardian of the Fleece and Fleece on your Cyphermel, so now it's doubly protected, and then follow up with the Heliolith next turn, that's really powerful. So I think artifacts here are going to have some pretty strong support, and then on the side of the artifacts, we also might see a little bit of like Earth artifacts decks where we have, again, Sprouter, but also we have Cyanectar. Cyanectar has an artifact that it wants to use to ascend into Wasp Ivy, so it wouldn't surprise me if we see some Solar Earth artifact Wasp Ivy stuff where you go like Cyanectar and Argo, use Argo to get out Poison Tunic, and then when Poison Tunic triggers, you get to send into Wasp Ivy, and all of a sudden you have a Wasp Ivy in your opponent's battle phase, along with all your other artifact support. I think that's going to be an interesting deck to explore as like a sub package to the entire artifact support line. So Solar, Fire, Earth artifacts looking pretty interesting for Daybreak. Alright, next archetype I want to talk about, we're talking about Water. So Water Nexus, or maybe we can call this Water on board. We have a couple cards that care about putting as many water spirits on board as possible between both Curubus and Chronodile. They don't really mesh well together, but generally both cards want you to put as much water on board as possible, generally by using Poseidon. Now with Curubus, we have effects with Eddy, where if Eddy is on board when you cast a Rock in a Hard Place, you get the special Curubus. Now generally doing that immediately isn't that great unless you have Poseidon take advantage of Curubus, where Curubus wants water on board to fuel its destruction effects. On the other hand, we have Chronodile, which wants water on field to empower its protection effects, as well as some destruction effects. So both of these, I don't think they mesh well enough together, because the Curubus side wants to spend spirits on board to destroy and heal, whereas the Chronodile needs those spirits to stay on board for protection, and would rather enchant each turn to pop cards, kind of like how Centaur or Voltempest work. It creates an interesting kind of duality of an archetype where you want Water Nexus, or kind of water on board, to just be able to fuel these effects as efficiently as possible. So Poseidon is going to be pretty strong here, where you go Poseidon into all these water cards, Stadiums and Drataguas and Nexus cards, because you're taking advantage of all the water on board. So you have Afroses, Drataguas, Curubuses, Chronodiles. It's going to be an interesting archetype, and I think something to look out for in the next set is probably a more premier water deck over the Lockgun stall deck we saw in Frostfall. Alright, next up is we're going to talk about Earth Nexus. So we've seen a little bit of dabbling of Earth Nexus in Frostfall, using things like Panzer, Clovey, Equalinks to kind of generate card advantage, healing, board destruction, etc. We have 2 powerful new additions that might help this deck shine. In the past, the deck has kind of struggled with closing out games, trying to go into like Centaur possibly, but now we have other powerful ways to manipulate the board with Mudlet. Mudlet allows us to, on receive, change position of Elestrals, kind of like Sorlet, allowing us to change our opponent's Elestrals into advantageous positions, or with the new card Bloom or Altar of the Stars, we can use Mudlet defensively to stop attacks, or potentially change our own Elestrals into attack or defense position to bait opponents' attacks with. And again, talking about Bloom here, Bloom's the other powerful piece here. Bloom to use 2 triggers of receive effects in the same turn with 1 card effect, where you both Nexus 1 then enchant, so you're going to trigger receives twice, so that's with Clovey 2 draws, with Mudlet 2 position swaps, turning Bloom into like a pseudo tsunami without an elemental restriction, combined also with Altar of the Stars. Now you have ways to do even more Nexus and position swaps. Earth Nexus is looking to be like a position swap powerhouse. Maybe we see a little bit of like Hibafin splash in there, but I think still with Earth Nexus and Tarber's probably your end game there, where you kind of play this position swap game, punch in with like your little 3/3s and stuff, potentially protect your things with your position swaps and your defensive tools, and then you drop this Giant Centaur on turn like 4 or 5, destroy stuff, blow things up with the Centaur. I think Earth Nexus is going to be a very interesting deck to keep an eye on in Daybreak. Next up in the Earth category, we have Earth Burn. We have 3 interesting new Earth fueling burn cards. We have Boltuga, which is the standout of this kind of new archetype, where it just lets you for 1 cost search out an Eruption. Now this does make Eruption basically a 4 cost. This Boltuga allows you to also dig it out of the underworld. So in theory, if you can recycle Boltuga, you can recycle 1 single Eruption over and over again. Combined with things like Pandasin and other defensive walls in Earth, you might be able to make this giant defensive burn Earth deck work, or just use it to support your other burn archetypes like Water Fire Burn and Krakatuga. Additionally, we have Vesetuga, Boltuga's Ascension, which is a little bit of an interesting riff on what Krakatuga is doing. So instead of burning for 3, it's burning 1 fire to burn for 2. Additionally, instead of destroying things with Eruption, it heals you Earth. Now that does mean you're going to have a really restricted or interesting spirit deck of mix of Earth and Fire to take advantage of Vesetuga. I do like that Vesetuga has a better efficiency rate for damage, where it's effectively 2 Fire Spirits for 4 damage, compared to Krakatuga's 2 Fire Spirits for 3 damage. The downside being that Vesetuga will need to be used over multiple turns to get advantage of it. And lastly, in the Fruit Burn archetype, we have Barabib. Now, Barabib I don't think belongs in the same deck as Boltuga, or maybe they do, because you're playing, in Barabib, you basically played in like a Fruit Engine or kind of Draw Engine deck, where you're using lots of invokes like Nectar of the Gods with Earth Spirits to trigger it, your Cornucopias, your Ambrosias, which ties in play to trigger it, maybe Rise from the Ashes to get Barabib back into play before comboing off, as well as Boltugas, then search your Eruptions. Maybe 2 different archetypes here, but I definitely think the Barabib is an interesting strong card, where if you're running lots of Invoke runes and say again a Fruit Engine, it helps you finish games out there with a burn strategy. Alright, next up, Elestrals as artifacts, kind of swinging back to the artifact thing, but this one's a little bit different. This deck is taking advantage of artifact Elestrals like Aramare, like Spy Nymph, and our new boy here, Rhine Nymph and Rhinosect. So this archetype is definitely going to be a very Feast or Famine focused deck built around Rhinosect, where Rhinosect will special itself out if you have an Elestral that was originally an Elestral as an artifact enchanted on board, meaning that if you get your Rhine Nymph in play, you can special Rhinosect out. Now, I don't think this deck is wholly complete. You definitely need other ways to trigger it, but it might be a fun little sub-package just to be aware of in kind of Frost, maybe Frost Solar Artifact decks with Rhine Nymphs and Helioliths and Rhinosect, where you can kind of use your Rhine Nymphs to get your Helioliths and Rhinosects out on board really quickly and efficiently for an aggressive artifact-esque deck. Next up, continuing with Frost, we're going to talk Frost Nexus support. Now, there's only Brumalinks in the set to kind of support Frost Nexus, but it is a powerful, interesting card. Yes, it's weaker than Equalinks. However, the fact is having a 5 defense body in Frost that both Nexuses and locks down back row is kind of what I think Shiverer wants to see, allowing you to kind of lock down back row, deal with other Nexus decks by locking down their Divine Runes, and then kind of setting up a board state where you're kind of healing a bunch of cards, locking down your opponent's back row so they can't do anything with that back row, and then dropping the giant Shiverer to finish them off at the end. I think this card's way more powerful than a lot of people give it credit for, and will help Frost Nexus decks really take on a stronger kind of form in Frostfall, or from Frostfall into Daybreak. Continuing, Morphrost gets a little bit more support in Bat form. This is a card that helps Terraform out. I don't know how good that Bear form will be unless there's more ways eventually to self-discard Bat form to trigger its effect. I don't think this gives a huge boost to Morphrost, but Morphrost is already a crazy consistent beatdown engine, so I don't think it needs much help, but it's cool to see some more Morphrost support down the line. We'll see if this does anything for the deck. And lastly, of our Frost supported decks, we have Polzer. This is going to be an interesting kind of beatdown addition to, I don't really know what Frost deck. This might help Frost self-mill decks with things like Morolith and Avalanche get kind of big and nasty. This could be potentially a 7 attack on turn 1. However, I don't know if that's enough support to make Morolith viable, but it is a nice little splash card to go with the Morphrost because it does get a little bit bigger than A-Bomb, caring about more than just the Morphrost in your Underworld. So as you're feeling Cryolinks, Cryoverns, etc., this is a nice cheap backup strategy for those decks. I think it's definitely something worth running at least 1 or 2 of in most of those Frost engine decks. Maybe even a Frost self-mill deck if that gets going will use Polzer and Morolith as your beatdown strategy. Next up, we have mill support. We have a Humbus Ascension in Humburst. We have Lumaru and Ruminous. 3 new cards for the archetype. Clearly, the Lumaru will help be an aggressive kind of engine to help mill decks. I don't think the Ascension is going to be that great in using the deck, but in addition to these cards, we also have some other support cards that might see play with Humbus. Things like Golden Fleece might help you protect that Humbus a little bit more cleanly, along with Argo to trigger Humbus while getting your Fleece, doubly protecting it, getting some mills out all at once with the Humbus on your opponent's turn. I think mill still not quite there as a top tier deck, but it's definitely a stronger deck now with the addition of the support cards for it. Up next, fire control support. Interesting enough, so we have Ash Rabbit, a retrain of Aster Rabbit. This card lets you select up to 3 cards, or rather you have to select 3 cards in your Underworld. Your opponent gives you 1 back to your hand. That's pretty powerful. It's obviously really slow at the start, but being a 5 defense body and fire is going to be pretty good for kind of more control-y fire decks, as well as the Fun Guide and Bronto Wisp deck. Also being part of that control engine, allowing you to kind of use Follow the Wisp, the Bronto Wisp, the Fun Guide to force your opponent to attack the wrong targets, potentially walling them off for a turn by making them attack like your Ash Rabbit early, stuff like that. And if you get 2 Fun Guides out, you can completely stop your opponent from attacking at all. How do you win with this deck is definitely the hard part to answer here. The short answer is probably going to be things like Eruption. Maybe you get your Scavacole out to search those Eruptions out. Maybe you set up for combo kills with things like Blazerus that we've seen in the past, or Waspires that we've seen in the past. You know, run some Helioses to even have more control aspects of your deck. Load up your Ash Rabbit, recover spirits with that, recover cards with that, and then ascend it into like a giant Waspire, soak up all your spirits, and blow your opponent up that way. Interesting fire control stuff. Maybe even Trifernal with a Bag of Winds. Might see some play here. So I think Fire Control definitely got some cool, interesting support with the Fire and Fire Lunar stuff in the set. And lastly, on the Fire side of things, I want to talk about Fire Stadium. Now, we've already seen like Fire Midrange play stadiums, etc., but now we have Rummikole, allowing us to run both Volcanic Forge and Soak the Forge with very little downside, being able to search either or, kind of adding additional support to this fire kind of beatdown deck focused around the stadium. So it's like Valkyries, Kinleo, Rummikole, your Lavalets are still there, so it kind of adds a little bit more to that fire mid-range deck. I think it takes away a little bit from the current fire mid-range stuff that we see play and do really well, while kind of helping focus more around the stadium and getting more consistency out of search engines, which could be interesting to see. And I think that's kind of where the fire deck is going to be heading, with this kind of fire consistency search engine, Lavalets, and just big beaters that like to have stadiums and play like Valkyries. Alright, really short Windburn support. We don't really care about the 2-drop here, but Toxiswarm is going to be pretty powerful in Windburn. Toxiswarm plus Exalt Flare is going to represent 3 burn every turn for almost 0 cost. You do have to get both on board, but it's not too difficult with things like Aeolus existing. Wind still costs a lot of spirits to be active, and it does have a good healer in the Nexus archetype, so Wind Burn / Wind Nexus will have more ways to finish the opponent. Wind has kind of fallen out of favor in Frostfall as opposed to other decks in the format, but I think this is going to make kind of burn decks in general, at least Wind Burn, more consistent in general. And while they're on the topic of burn, I should also say that burn in general is going to get a kind of interesting revamp, where we're going to be able to play Toxian, Toxiswarm, Boltuga, maybe Krakatuga and Eruptions all in the same deck, potentially just playing a bunch of 4-attack bodies with some support like Zeus to just chip away at our opponent over and over again, where you go kind of Elichick, Toxhorn, Toxian, Boltuga, maybe Pandison, and just chip and burn your opponent's face really, really fast with that kind of aggressive, just hit the board running, poke, 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 poke kind of deck. Kind of interesting to note there, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because I don't really know where that deck will kind of fit together. It's going to be interesting to see people try it. Moving on to Thunder archetypes, we have Thunder Nexus support, kind of sort of with Larva Cell, kind of sort of with Archetype. Archetype is going to be a great way to kind of enchant a bunch of spirits on your board, to enchant your Toxians, enchant your Rabbits. It does get a little bit difficult to get the Archetype out with its normal cast trigger. However, you can always just ascend it over your extra body, trigger your Rabbit, trigger your Toxian, get a beater on board, and get a little bit more of an aggressive attacker in the Thunder Nexus deck that it doesn't currently have. It did also lose the Sparkit, that's why I mentioned the Larva Cell here. It is a Thunder Nexuser, it can Nexus 1 Thunder, but I don't think it's going to be seeing play in Thunder Nexus. I don't think Thunder Nexus is that kind of starving for a Nexus Elestral. I think it will go fine with things like Altar and Circle if it needs to, as Archetype as well helps support re-enchanting onto board. Maybe Thunder Nexus gets renamed Thunder Receivers. Hey, before we continue, I would like to let you guys know that if you hit like and subscribe, you support me a ton with the YouTube algorithm engine. Additionally, if you want to support me financially and you're looking to buy an Elestrals product, including a Daybreak product, check out my referral link down below. If you use that referral link when buying Elestrals product, I get a little kickback and commission, and I appreciate that a ton. You guys enjoy the rest of the video. Alright, and next up in Thunder, or last up in Thunder, Thunder Aggro, or I guess Thunder Solar Aggro with Sovocell. This is a line with Larva Cell, Anacell, Sovocell that will generally just get you tons of spirits onto board, blow up your opponent's back row, and hopefully swing with this giant Sovocell with like 5 spirits on it. Now, it is really cool that this archetype kind of quick ascends itself with a little bit of a other Solar or Thunder Nexus kind of strategy to it. However, it is kind of expensive, and it does get basically eaten up by multiple pieces of removal, or like PTA plus a defensive body. So I don't think it's going to be that insane, but it is really cool to see a kind of 1-drop that quick ascends into a 2-drop, that quick ascends into a 3-drop that can blow back row and then swing for a bunch of damage. It's going to be a very interesting Thunder deck to watch. I don't know where it kind of fits in the Thunder Nexus kind of build-arounds already, but it is an interesting tool engine to kind of put into Thunder and Solar together to make this aggressive beat stick of a 3-drop deck. And we'll see where it goes. It might just be like, oh, it's another Pantera kind of deck where the threat of it's more important than it actually existing, but I do think Sovocell makes a really interesting aggressive Thunder deck. And now we're moving on to Solar, the brunt of the set. Let's talk about, I guess we'll start with Solar Nexus. So we have Jotara, Lodagon, Corvishine, P-Gleam, Exaltus, and I guess you could probably also say Cypermel. So these 6 cards are kind of creating this core Solar Nexus deck that wants to generally kind of generate lots of like early value engines with its 1-drops, where you have things like Corvishine to filter, Jotara to heal you up, Cypermel kind of provides a Nexus bank as well as a resilient body on board, P-Gleam allows you to kind of manipulate your opponent's stats and help maybe have your opponent kind of ram their own things into your P-Gleam by using Altar on it and stuff like that. But the big kicker here is definitely that Lustragon. The ability to both Nexus itself and has a receive trigger when Nexus 2 to destroy a card makes it kind of like Lodagon, kind of like Locagon, except it can trigger itself. And that's the biggest kicker of Lustragon and the Solar Nexus deck in general, is the fact that Lustragon as a boss Elestral, in a sense, can trigger itself. It can pop cards with just it on board plus 1 card to feed off of it. So I think that's going to be really powerful. And it can always kind of just tag in like a Celestleo at the end to potentially blow up more of your opponent's stuff. But generally, kind of Solar Nexus, I think, is looking really, really powerful and interesting with these 6 cards. Alright, and lastly, we're going to talk about Foretell decks in Solar. So there's a lot going on here. So we have the Lions and the Cows. They work really well together, starting with the Cows and Apollo. So Apollo will let us foretell cards. Our Soul Bell will let us look at 2 additional cards when we foretell with Apollo, and if we happen to find Soul Stocks, we can then special our Soul Bell into Soul Stocks and remove something from our opponent's board and heal up some spirits. That's pretty powerful there. Additionally, other foretell cards like Neblio generates lots of card advantage. I don't think you really use Leo Bright here, but Celestleo is phenomenal at just going blow up multiple cards on your board. So legitimately, if potentially like a turn 1 you get Soul Stocks out, turn 2 you get Celestleo out, and destroy lots of cards on your opponent's side of the deck. The deck loves to kind of manipulate the top of a deck with First Light. First Light allows you to kind of always get that Soul Bell to trigger into Soul Stocks, or even if you have Celestleo out, before you trigger Celestleo, you can go First Light, load up the top of your deck, and then Celestleo, add those cards to your hand, and blow up your opponent. So I think Foretell is going to be really interesting in Solar, and we've seen a lot of people murmuring about its power already. So with that, that is pretty much everything that's getting general solid support in Daybreak. I probably didn't go over everything. I definitely didn't go over everything. There's a few cards I left out, like obviously the Camels and Fulguries. I don't know what you're doing with that card. But in general, this is all the kind of archetypal support and new archetypes in Daybreak going out of Frostfall into the new set. Let me know what you guys think below. Which deck do you think is going to be best in Daybreak? Because there's a lot of potential powerful heavy hitter decks that are looking to come out of this set, as well as lots of cool, interesting new support with the set. So let me know what you think below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.